Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald. Well, a 20% year-on-year increase in violent crime across England and Wales, and it's culminated in the last 6 days in 4 more knife crime murders in London. And in response to this, London Mayor Sadiq Khan was out on the airwaves this morning. Here he was this morning telling us it could take up to a generation to solve this problem.
Well, according to Glasgow, and when we've got the Violence Reduction Unit in Glasgow helping us, to really make significant progress can take up to 10 years and a generation. Why do they say that? The reason why they say that is because they saw in Scotland what we're seeing in London, which is children in primary school thinking not only is it okay to carry a knife, but it gives them a sense of belonging, joining a criminal gang. It makes them feel safer. And they don't see anything wrong in getting involved in this sort of behaviour. So, at the one hand, we've got to be tough in relation to enforcement, and that's why we've got officers as part of the Violent Crime Task Force doing intelligence-led stop and searches, taking knives off our streets, offensive weapons off our streets, guns off our streets.
So knives in our primary schools. Well, somebody who was having none of this morning was Piers Morgan on ITV's Good Morning Britain, and he was telling Sadiq Khan that he himself, as London Mayor, needs to take more responsibility.
We can't wait 10 years for you to get your ducks in a row and stop these stabbings. We need more immediate action now. And the question is, what are you actually going to do? To stop this tidal wave of stabbings and stabbing deaths, because it is out of control. You know it and we know it.
Well, so we've got fewer than 30,000 officers, officers working extremely hard. There may be no consolation to the victims of crime, and I'm extremely sorry for any victim of crime, but even you have to accept, in the last 8 years, we've lost more than 3,000 police officers from London. On top of that, we've lost more than 3,000 community support officers from London. On top of that, we've lost more than 5,000 police staff in London. On top of that, we've lost more than 35 youth
None of this is your
London.
fault, is what you're saying, right?
Well, the point I'm making is, Piers, look...
What you're doing is that you are passing the buck, as you always do, to central government, right? You'll probably tell me in a minute it's Theresa May, because she cut police... We know all that. What I'm asking you is, do you personally, though, accept any responsibility for the fact that these numbers are going up and the number of stabbings is worsening? Do you accept that as London Mayor, it's happening on your watch and you are partly to blame? Or is it all everybody else's fault?
I'm the Mayor of London. The buck stops with me as far as London is concerned, but it's a duty for me to explain the circumstances around which our police are working incredibly hard. So the two things as the Mayor that are most important that I do is, one, give our police the resources they need, and two, give them my support and my backing.
Well, I have to say, I find Sadiq Khan's response to this pathetic. I think he is really passing the buck. He's copping out. There seems to be from him a sort of fatalistic acceptance that all of this is happening. It'll take a decade to solve. I won't still be in office when it comes. Well, here's one or two ideas. Why not bring back stop and search and stop being worried about being accused of victimising certain communities? Go to where knife crime's happening, bring back stop and search. What about some tougher punishments? I mean, too often we hear of people who are caught carrying knives. They go to the magistrate's court. What do they get? They get a warning and a fine of 150 quid. What about saying anybody on our streets carrying a knife will get a sentence? And to hear that we've got children in our primary schools carrying knives, well, here's an idea. Let's put a metal detector on every single school gate in this country. Then, Sadiq, you'll find that primary school kids don't have knives with them during the course of the day. I think there's a lot more we can do. I frankly find this attitude blasé. I think he is copping out. I think he is passing the buck. But please, tell me, do you think Sadiq Khan is right in saying it'll take a generation to solve this? Or like me, do you think it's a cop-out? And if you think, no, Sadiq is right, there are huge societal problems behind this that'll take forever to sort out, call 0345 60 60 973. If you're with me and think he really ought to stand up and start getting tough, then text to 84850. And please, any solutions you've got to this problem, let me know by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch us on Facebook. I'm live from Birmingham, where I'll be doing a big TV show later on Brexit. Hi, Nigel. If more police were on the streets is the answer today, why is it not every day? Also, when I listen to LBC phone-ins, I hear from ex-police officers who appear to have the answers. Well, Jamie, I think a lot of ex-police officers who've left the police force, frankly, put their head in their hands with bewilderment about some of the things they're hearing today, such as the boasts that we saw from the Metropolitan Police a year ago, saying we've got 1,000 officers and they're fighting hate crime. Well, I tell you where the real hate crime is. It's the 118 homicides that we've seen so far this year in our capital. I'm going to Paddington to speak to David. Good evening, David.
Nigel, yes. I'm not a massive fan of Piers Morgan, but I'm afraid he's now crucified Sadiq Khan as the Mayor of London.
He has, yes.
Because the guy just simply did not know what to say at all, had no answer, except to just repeat figures that he'd repeated 3 times already. And he was reduced to a snivelling little wreck. And you're the mayor, which is a leader of the city, of the greatest city in with the 5th largest economy in the world or whatever, as part of that country. You cannot not come up with at least some intelligent answer of your own, as a leader. I'm sorry, he's got to go. It's ridiculous.
It really was very weak, David, wasn't it? Very weak indeed. Do you know something? When the figure got to 100 murders, I discovered that the Mayor of London had not visited a single crime scene, had not spoken to a single bereaved family. I wonder what he thinks leadership is actually all about.
No, quite right. No, that's right. He doesn't have an inkling. He's not a leader. He stood for the job on his ego. He won it, and now he should realise he made a mistake. Let's get real.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, my own opinion, which is different to your own, probably, is that the drug business should be all legalised. It's prohibition. And if you have prohibition, just as in Al Capone's times in the 30s, you're going to have gangs. And gangs are going to find the nearest weapon, in this case knives. And I'm sorry that the amount of people dying is going to go up and up until we realise that they have to license drugs, treat those who get sick from them in the hospitals as they do with alcohol, and take the tax, which is worth billions.
David,
Wake up
would you
and smell the coffee?
David, I completely understand that so much of this are people coming from communities where the educational levels are not what they should be, where the employment prospects are not what they should be, where family breakdown is very high, and the drugs gangs are a huge part of this. But when you talk about, selling drugs on license, how far do you go? I mean, do you go as far as crack cocaine?
Well, crack cocaine, you could possibly keep that as I don't know, there would still be an underground for something somewhere, as there is with, absinthe, super strength alcohol. It's not going to go away completely, but that's a subsidy of cocaine, which I think, when you think there's $2 billion a year in the hands every year of crooks with guns and gangs.
Yeah,
and so
David,
take that $2 billion away from them, and then what are they going to do?
David,
they've got nothing left to do.
David, I tell you what, you could convince me of this, but I keep asking this question. Countries like Portugal, where they've changed the drug laws quite radically, countries like Switzerland, where they've changed the drug laws in a big, big way, I want to know, a decade on, has crime really been reduced? And David, I would love to see a genuine Royal Commission into this subject. Thank you. Darren is calling from Glasgow. Now, Darren, Sadiq Khan was referring to problems in Glasgow earlier. You're a new caller. Welcome to the show.
Hiya. Well, in regards to Sadiq's comments about Glasgow, having lived in Glasgow all my life, it did work. It was a long-term plan, but it has worked. When I was growing up, when I was younger in Glasgow, you couldn't walk out of your local scheme without the fear of getting stabbed. Nowadays, that problem's gone. So, it is a long-term plan. But Sadiq's right. It is the right plan. But you're saying about him trying to pass the buck. I don't think he is passing the buck. I mean, the buck ultimately does land with the Tories. You're saying the solution is maybe bring back stop and search. Where's the police to do that? The police have been taken off the streets, their budgets have been cut. Who's going to do the stop and search?
Well, Darren, there is the issue, firstly, of numbers of police, and you're quite right. There's been a 20% reduction in police in England and Wales since 2010. That is a fact, absolutely. It's a problem. But the other issue, of course, is how police are directed. Darren, tell me, is there one thing that you can think of in Glasgow that did reduce the incidence of knife crime?
Education.
Just education?
No, you asked me for one example.
Fine. No. Listen, I don't doubt that. What about my idea? You know, when I hear the Mayor of London telling me that there are children going into primary school with knives, what about metal detectors on the school gates?
Who's going to pay for the metal detectors, Nigel?
I don't think they're going to be terribly expensive. But, yeah, sure, they'll cost money, but they wouldn't be terribly expensive. Maybe that would be a good preventative. I don't know. I'm interested, Darren. The fact that it has worked to some degree in Scotland is a good thing, and you can deal with causal problems. But equally, isn't it right to say, I mean, for example, on Twitter, Paul says to me, 10 years for carrying a knife would soon stop it. I'm not sure it would stop all of it. But don't we need some punishment as well, Darren?
But then, well, for starters, our prison systems are already busting at the seams. Where are we going to put all these people?
We might have to build some.
Again, I mean, we're getting back to the metal detectors as well. They're saying they're not going to cost much. You're talking about every school in England and Wales. We're at the times now where teachers are buying kids food.
Yeah. No, Darren, I'm not saying this comes cost-free, and I'm saying when things come out of the public purse, you have to prioritise. But, frankly, with 1,000 thought police crime officers in London, I think maybe some reprioritisation. Darren, thank you, and some good news from Darren saying things have got better. And hey, look at New York. My friend Rudy Giuliani radically transformed crime in New York with a very targeted approach to policing, and they got tough on offenders too. Please don't tell me there's nothing we can do. I thought the mayor today, frankly, sounded pretty blasé about all of this. It'll take a decade. I think we need a much greater sense of urgency, and I suspect that's the majority view. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It is now 6:15. When Sadiq Khan says it could take up to 10 years to solve or begin to solve the knife crime problem in London, I'm asking you, is that a fair and reasonable comment, or is it a cop-out? And look, I'm not blaming him for all of this. When he became Mayor of London, we already had a problem, but it has exploded over the course of the last year or two, and I just don't think he's talking about this with enough sense of urgency. I think there are things that can be done, and just to blame police cuts on its own simply isn't enough. Russ from Croydon says, all day long on LBC News we're being told there are hundreds of extra police on the streets today. If that's true, where have they come from? Where do they normally hide? Russ, it's about reprioritisation, and I suspect in many cases there'll be police who've had to work overtime, lost holiday, etc., because we've had 4 murders in London with knives in the course of the last 6 days. I'm going to Peckham to speak to Kofi, who's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Kofi.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am well, welcome. But Kofi, and maybe, tell me I'm wrong, but I just don't think that the mayor has enough sense of urgency about this.
Well, Nigel, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you this time.
All right.
I think you have a point with regards to the response that he came up with when he was obviously talking to the video that you played or the audio that you played.
Yeah.
However, I just do think that the whole thing that we're talking about, we're missing the point. We should I think the problem is parents. It's parents. You've got young kids, 15-year-old, 14-year-old, dying on the street. Where are their parents? Why is your child out at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock? You don't know what your child is doing. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, Kofi, when you've got a 15, 16-year-old, getting them back in before 9 p.m. is not that easy, is it?
Well, it's not. If you've got a child and one day it's not something that he always does, you know where the child is. You know where the child is actually really. Do you know your child's friends? You know. Well, I mean, it cannot be possible. Your child go to school. 15-year-old, you go to school. Why are you out 8 o'clock? What are you doing?
Yeah, no, Kofi. Look, you make a fair point, but can I just say this though? That, there are parts of London in which family breakdown figures are very, very high. You might find they're one-parent families. You might find that parent is working kind of round the clock just to keep a roof over their heads. Not all children come from homes where there are 2 parents.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate also, can I just say, it's not going to be that large number of people that are going to come from that broken home to be actually a victim of this knife crime. And also, when you're talking about the police, what are police really going to do about this? Seriously.
Well, okay, Kofi, let me say this. They should be stopping and searching. They shouldn't be frightened of doing it for fear of being called racist or whatever else it may be. They should, in areas where knife crime is prevalent, be stopping and searching.
But it's not Sadiq Khan that makes the law about actually you can stop and search. The law is there. Why are we blaming him? Why are we blaming him?
Well, we're not blaming him for we're not blaming him for this. I think what we're saying is he doesn't appear to be taking this seriously enough. He is not advocating as mayor tough measures to deal with it. That's my criticism, Kofi.
Well, I think he's doing a very, very difficult job. And when he does say that actually his hands are very tight, his hands are very tight because of the fact that actually we're facing a lot of conservatives. They just basically making it very, very difficult for them.
Well, I have to say, Kofi, I listened this morning to Home Office Minister Victoria Atkins on combating violent crime, and frankly, she was no better than Sadiq Khan. So I'm not just blaming, this is not purely party political, it's about attitude. Kofi, thank you for making the point about parents. Aaron is a new caller from Southend. Good evening to you.
Good evening, you on?
Yeah, I'm all right. I want to see a bit more. I want to see a bit of action.
Well, basically, my viewpoint on the situation is I do agree with what he's saying. The knife crime and the sort of lifestyle it leads to has become such the norm in that sort of area that it's become almost like a culture. I mean,
yes.
If you listen to any of the new sort of rap music, grime music, just drill music, all through all these lyrics, it's constantly talking about selling drugs and stabbing people. So when they've got role models like these rappers running around, it's no wonder why they seem to think that this is the acceptable way to behave and help themselves.
So how do we tell them, Aaron, that it's not acceptable?
I think obviously some more like positive role models in that sort of genre and sort of areas would help a lot. I think it's a case of you look up to the people you respect, and some of these people that are running around talking about the guns, knives and drugs, it's not the sort of viewpoints they need to be taking in.
I mean, Aaron, you know, where Sadiq Khan is right and where you're right is there is a cultural problem here, as you say, through music, etc., almost a sort of glorification of all of this. But that doesn't mean that you can't get tough on the offenders. Doesn't mean you can't scare them a bit. I mean, I want people to be scared of walking down the street carrying a knife. And at the moment, we are just not doing that. But no, your point about some of that music and its lyrics is a very, very good one indeed. Where are the parents, I get on Twitter? Perhaps prosecuting them when their under 18 is found with a knife. Responsibility back to parenting. Sharon, a lot of people would agree with that, but I did make the case that there are a lot of families in which there isn't a parent present, and that is a real problem here. Frederick is a new caller from Canning Town. Good evening, Frederick, and welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I am okay, but I want to see some action, Frederick.
I know, look, I think it's ridiculous. There's so much wider issues that are at stake here. And I think the disease at the heart of British politics, as well as society, comes from this foreign interference. I can't understand how we're not up in arms about Russian interference with the Brexit vote, about all the stuff that's
maybe
going on with the right wing.
Maybe because they can't find any. Frederick, maybe because they can't find any. But back to the issue of knife crime. When the Mayor of London says it'll take a decade to solve, is that the right approach, or is it frankly a cop-out?
It's always been there. It's in line with the hip-hop music, but we've got wider issues and Russian interference. I can't understand.
I don't buy that at all, Frederick. I'm moving on. I haven't got time. Sam is a new caller from Romford. Hi, Sam. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Now, you came up with a list of things that should be being done to...
Suggestions, yes.
Yeah, none of which are within Sadiq Khan's power. He can't increase sentences. We've got a Prime Minister who's opposed to stop and search, so how can he bring that into London?
I tell you what he can do. He can lead the debate on these things. He is the Mayor of London. He said himself in that interview that the buck stops with him. He can be an advocate for changes that are needed, and he can encourage schools in London to put metal detectors in. And we'll have to work out what that's going to cost, but it's not going to be a fortune. And he can argue, you know, and he meets the Metropolitan Police all the time. He could argue for a reprioritisation. It seems that both the Tory government and Sadiq Khan are running away from the concept of stop and search. So actually, in terms of influencing the debate, I think he's in a very powerful position.
But I suppose with stop and search, my nan ran a wig shop in Brixton during the riots, and And, it risks alienating a whole generation. I'm not going to get searched as a 30-year-old white man walking through an area wearing a suit on my way to the East India Club to have a cigarette with you. I'm
afraid they've banned smoking inside private clubs as well. But anyway, go on.
But we've had a couple on the square, Nigel.
Okay, fine. All right.
But I'm not going to get stopped. It is going to be young black men who are getting stopped. And that is going to alienate them even more than they already feel. And I work in mental health. I've met a lot of young black men who feel very alienated by the way that they're treated by the police, especially when they've also got a mental health record. If you add on the sort of encouragement of the police to stop young black men as they're walking around the street, you're going to end up with a hugely disengaged generation.
Well, maybe we've got a disengaged generation already. Sam, when I hear the mayor saying that it's now becoming commonplace for kids at primary schools to carry knives, something says to me we can stop that.
I do agree, but are we going to stop and search primary school children?
Absolutely. If we have to, why not? Why not?
Walking with their mum on their way to school?
Well, actually, no problem there, because my metal detector at the gates will get them, won't it?
I just think, that what a terrifying experience. I've got a young son. What a terrifying experience that would be for him if he was stopped by the police and
walking through. But walking through
the idea that there might be knives in school
walking through a metal detector into school doesn't strike me as being too terrifying. Look, Sam, you can tell me my suggestions don't work, but at least I've made some. I've put some on the table. I get that stop and search leads to some community criticism. I understand that. But at the moment, it appears to me we are doing very, very little. And I'm not satisfied. And no doubt I'll see you again in St James's Square at some point. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It's now 6:30 in time. Sadiq Khan tells us it's going to take 10 years to sort out the knife crime problem in London, that after 4 murders in the course of the last 6 days, and I just don't think it's good enough. I think he's copping out. I think we've got to get tough. Metal detectors in schools, bringing back stop and search, and real penalties for people who are caught with knives. That may not solve all of the social problems that are leading to this, but goodness me, might just make our streets a bit safer in the short term. Before I get back to your calls on that, the British Army, Air Force and Navy have a massive recruitment problem. It's the biggest they've had for a long, long time. People simply aren't joining. I'm not surprised by that. They've been run down ever since 2010, particularly, and it's difficult to say to people, join a service that keeps on contracting. But we do allow people who aren't British to join the British Army, normally after they've lived in this country for 5 years, and we make the odd exception for people from the Commonwealth. Well, the plan now is to expand that and maybe to recruit as many as 1,350 people for the armed forces from Commonwealth countries, people who've never lived in Britain and perhaps have never even visited Britain. Is this a good idea? Well, I tell you what, as we approach this Sunday, the 100th anniversary of the armistice, it's perhaps worth remembering that in those 2 world wars, 40% of the contribution made by British forces in both of those wars came from what are now called Commonwealth countries. In those days, they were the Empire. It was an incredible contribution. Not one of them was pressed into doing it. They were all volunteers. And one of my thoughts and my views on our country going forward, particularly with Brexit, is that we can be a lot closer to the Commonwealth, countries with whom we've got a shared history and shared values, and I have no problem at all with these people joining the armed forces, even if they've never lived in our country. Now back to rising knife crime, violent crime, up 20% in the course of 1 year. And Phil from Birkenhead by text says, Mrs May was the longest serving Home Secretary in modern times. She was useless. She must take some of the blame. And I think, Phil, that actually is a very fair point. Jackie from Watford wants to get even tougher from me. She says, bring in the army. They haven't got much on at the moment. We should utilise them more. That would frighten the life out of the thugs. Well, Jackie, I guess that's all about rules of engagement. What would you actually want the army to do? I'm all in favour of bringing the army in if there is a huge, I mean, let's say mass rioting started in the streets, I can see the argument then for bringing in the army. I'm not quite sure we're ready for that yet, despite how bad things are. Nigel, we shouldn't be having this conversation, as the government should be sorting out this violence. They are there to govern. Do they know what that means? Obviously not. Kathy, as I've said it twice now, this is not just Sadiq Khan and the Labour Party. I think the Tory party have been equally weak and bad on this. Jonathan from Reading is a new caller to the show. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, Nigel. As usual, even on whatever the subject, I find myself agreeing with you. So,
right.
Well done there. I've been a police officer for 20 years, and
right.
I joined the year that Labour came to power. And I'm just going to split my point in two. I'll be as quick as I can.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, when I joined, we had a fairly new headquarters with its own residential block, all these nice bedrooms, and the effect of the Labour government was all of a sudden, month by month, a bedroom would disappear and a little department would pop up, and officers were taken from the streets and were put into the stolen milk department and the stolen cat with two tails department, and then the department which measured the figures for how many bottles of milk had been stolen. And so, from my view, when Sadiq Khan talks about police cuts, a lot of the cuts that I've seen are in for those bureaucrats that none of us knew what they did, and in some cases they didn't know what they did. You sat with them in the canteen, and they couldn't give you an explanation as to what they did.
So this is about growth of bureaucracy and actually misplacing our police resources. Yeah,
misplacing the resources. But the other thing that we need to have is we need to know that we're supported from above. Now, I certainly wouldn't feel supported by Sadiq Khan for 1 minute. But the problem you've got now is that, as I say, things have changed a lot in my 20 years. I make myself sound very, very old, but I'm a fourth generation police officer, and my great-grandfather would be turning in his grave, because ultimately you have to look. We are intelligence-led, whatever we do, and the guy says about the 30-year-old white man in a suit wouldn't be stopped and searched, and no, he wouldn't, because he isn't somebody who statistically is involved in these crimes. And as uncomfortable as it may be, if you look at the statistics, unfortunately, they do fill a very specific demographic.
Well, Jonathan, let's be frank about this. Most of this crime is black on black, isn't it?
It is indeed. But the problem that we have is you try and stop and speak to one of these youths, the vast majority, and all of a sudden they come from nowhere. Every one of them's got a smartphone filming it. You're racist scum, you're this, that and the other. And I think about my grandfather, when he was policing, he'd have just swiped his cape down, taken their feet from underneath them, and in one move, and for us to take these people on, we are going to, and to try and deal with this, we will get complaints, we will get videos posted on
isn't that, Jonathan,
media, and we need support.
Isn't that, Jonathan, why, both Conservative and Labour parties are terrified of stop and search?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're afraid of the bad publicity.
And yet, isn't the truth of it, Jonathan, that far from being racist, putting in place stop and search and tough measures would save black lives?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It would. And we used to have a big thing called Operation Cordless, where do you remember where the phone boxes used to get doxyacetylene torched, and they used to steal the cash boxes out of them. We had a very specific ethnic group who were committing those crimes, and we used to go out, and if we saw them, we stopped them, because they were the people that we would expect that there's a chance of finding those things in the back of their car.
Yeah.
And this is the thing now, is that they're completely afraid of any bad publicity to deal with that. And our hands are tied. And Sadiq Khan, I cringe every time I hear this number of people lost, this number of people lost. Well, hang on a minute, and in fairness to community support officers, there's a very simple rule that, people who are law-abiding will like the police, criminals will dislike the police, and you can do all these interventions, you can have community support officers holding coffee mornings and doing all this sort of stuff. You won't change that fact that people who are prepared to commit crime will not like the police.
No, but I mean, I guess what community support can do is get better intelligence from within communities. But hey, Jonathan, thanks for the call, and particularly the insight into the growth of bureaucracy within the police force. Now, some out there coming up with much tougher solutions than me. Henry says young men carrying knives should be put straight into national service. Mary says national service to get the gangs off the street. They wouldn't know what had hit them. Gosh, I'd be very fascinated to see political party supporting bringing back national service. That would be interesting. I'm off to Waltham Forest to speak to Sophie, another new caller to the show. Good evening, Sophie.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you very much for taking my call. I've heard what the previous callers have said, but fundamentally, I think that these tough measures are treating the symptom and not the root cause.
Sophie, I agree with that. I understand that. I'm not suggesting that the tough measures that I'm proposing solve all of this problem, but I am saying it might make the streets a bit safer in the short term, all right?
Might make the streets a bit safer in the short term, but until we tackle the root cause, this will just be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay.
This black on black crime is disproportionately affecting the black community. It is black people typically stabbing and killing other black people. These are typically affecting, young males, predominantly from low-income families, single-parent families, where there might be one mother with 2, 3, 4 children working all the hours and doesn't have tabs on the child. Now, I appreciate that a parent should have control of what their child is doing, but also we need to have things like after-school clubs for children so that they're not, looking for things to fill their time and going into crime and other issues. We need to be filling their time, allowing them to take on a hobby, take on a new skill. Governments need to be working with local communities to understand how they perceive the root cause. In South London in particular, there are huge amounts of stabbings. And this is because there's not enough for young people to do. We also need to be introducing these young children with role models. I mean, I personally work with a great London-based charity. I won't name them, but they are doing fantastic work by targeting primary school children and intervening early, pairing them up with role models, allowing those children to aspire beyond what they see immediately in front of them, not going into gang crime, not being seduced by the free pair of trainers, and that's what gang leaders do.
But Sophie, you make the point about the community in which it's happening, family breakdown. They're all things, Sophie, that I've acknowledged since we went on air earlier on this evening. But if I was a young man living in South London and say I wanted to play sport, I mean, there's no shortage of facilities, is there?
Yeah, but they're not all free. And we have to recognise that these low-income families cannot afford the privilege of paying for their children to have tutor-led or instructor-led sports activities.
Do you think our schools are doing enough?
No.
I mean, it seems to me that, and I'm talking more, we're talking young males here, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because I've always had the view that if young males like football or cricket or basketball or whatever it is, and they become part of a team, they're probably a bit less likely to get into trouble. And that's where the schools could play a huge role here, isn't it?
It is, but the schools need funding. The schools need funding to be able to run after-school clubs, to be able to give free lessons to students, and to really be targeting these activities.
An element of culture too, Sophie.
Yeah. Agreed.
A lot of people I've spoken to in teaching say the conditions inside London schools are so awful, they can't wait for the bell to go and leave the premises.
But I think fundamentally the government needs to be doing more, and the solution is...
Okay, so, Sophie, Sophie, I don't take issue with what you're saying. I do think there are longer-term things we need to do. I'm not pretending this is easy, but when I'm saying get tough on it, I stand by what I say. I think we can make the streets safer. Primary school kids carrying knives... No, Mr. Mayor, we can stop that. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:45, and gang culture seems to be a huge part of this knife crime problem. For example, I get here. Children have been neglected for years by government. Divorced families are up. Unmarried motherhood is up. This leaves children isolated and drawn to gang culture where life is cheap. It's not Khan's fault. I'm not suggesting that all of this is Khan's fault. I am suggesting that he appears almost blasé in his response to the rise in knife crime in London. I think people want to see a bit more leadership and a bit more action. That is my view. I'm off to Watford to speak to Tony, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Tony.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Okay, so what do you think? I mean, is he just copping out on this?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, as a serving Met police officer who's not long finished one of my own shifts...
oh, wow.
I can categorically say that stop and search has never gone away, despite what the public think.
All right.
If it's done lawfully and within reason, as a police officer, you can do your job and not worry about it. However, in terms of being supported by management and by the mayor, that's another matter. The real issue lies in when I arrest someone for having what we call a zombie knife or a machete on them, and I put them in front of a magistrate's court with all the evidence collected.
Yeah, what happens? A warning. A warning.
Yeah, and that's the big issue. It's like with children. If with actions come to consequences, people know, the people that I deal with every day know that they're going to get a slap on the wrist or this or that, which then comes on to wider issues of funding and less of us on the street, and then to prisons, and then it's just one big circle of, I don't know, it's just wrong. Everything's in terms of...
So, Tony, point you were making, and I said at the top of the hour, that what generally happens is someone goes to a magistrate's court, they get a 150 quid fine and a warning. Does that happen in nearly every case in your experience?
I can't say every case, but in a lot of cases that I follow up on, then it does.
So do you as a police officer then wonder why you bothered?
Yes. And you do get disillusioned with how how the public perceives you, how we're spoken about. I can categorically say, for me and every other police officer in this country, we go out every day with best intentions to do what we can. There is nothing I like more than arresting an offender, be it for an assault or for carrying a knife or for having drugs on them. But it's frustrating when you check up on the case and you look at it and
see what's
CPS
happening.
And nothing happens. It's very frustrating, but we do absolutely everything we can, despite perception and with all the cuts and everything else. I mean, I could talk for hours on it.
Oh, no, I'm sure you could. And you're very passionate about it, and I'm very pleased that you are. Tell me something. Do you think that tougher sentences would act as a deterrent?
100%.
Okay. All right. Tony, great call. Thank you for calling us. And, hey, folks, we got people like Tony out there, taking some pretty big risks, dealing with people carrying, as he said, zombie knives and machetes. He does his job, gets them to the magistrate's court, and virtually nothing happens. It's crackers. We need to be tougher. I really do believe this, and that call makes me think it even more than I was at the start of this show this evening. I'm off to Ruislip to speak to Richard, another new caller to the show. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Nigel.
So, what's to be done?
Honestly, I can't believe I'm actually agreeing with you for once.
All right. Well, it's a funny thing, but human beings, can agree on stuff and disagree on stuff. I mean, it's just the way it is.
I think so. What I think is, I'm a black male. I live in London.
Yep.
I've been stop and search before, and I don't really. And for the first time, when I was stop and search, I kind of feel a bit targeted. But eventually, I started thinking about it. The officer that stopped me over, he was not rude. He was just quite polite. Explained the reason why he wanted to search me. Explained the reason why the area is a bit dangerous and a lot of knife crime around. And I understand it. I agree. And I say, no, that's no problem at all. That took about 2 minutes. We get on well, and on my way I go. And I think people that are disagreeing with a stop and search, I mean, unless you get your family, someone in your family gets stabbed, and sometimes even get killed, and nothing's been done. And always, when things been done, we always blame the police, why police is not doing more. And when the police trying to do a bit more, and they end up wrong again. So it makes the police job quite very difficult for them. I think we should, as long as the police are actually doing it in the right way, not actually doing it in an aggressive way whereby people will perceive them as racism. I think it should be.
Now that's interesting. That's interesting, Richard. So actually, it's about how the police approach people, how they deal with people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
No, and you had no objection to me. What age are you, Richard?
I'm 20. I'm 28.
You're 28. Okay. And how long ago were you stop and searched?
About 2 years ago.
Okay.
About 2 years ago.
No, well, that's it. Listen, I'm pleased to hear you say that. Thank you. Thank you. Richard there from Ruislip, young black man, living in London, been stop and search, but said the Metropolitan Police did it the right way, and that clearly makes a difference. I've got time for one more caller on this subject this evening. I'm going to Ealing to speak to another new caller called Samantha. Good evening.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I certainly can.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can, and this is not an easy call for me.
Okay.
I don't work for the police, but I have some sort of insight into police procedures because 2 years ago I was the victim of an attempted murder charge. I had to sit through a Crown Court procedure, listening to the judge tell a panel that, of course, they would expect my DNA to be on the main weapon used in the attack. And I would say there were several weapons used in the attack on me. The main weapon was a large kitchen knife, and I had to listen to the judge tell the panel that, of course, you'd expect my DNA to be on it because not just was my blood there, but it had come from my kitchen. Well, actually, it hadn't come from my kitchen, so that caused a bit of a hoo-ha. But the main thing was that afterwards we had to go through a separate procedure to take a new statement from me. There were two things here. During the investigation, I was never, ever, ever asked. I wasn't even shown a photo of the main weapon that was used in the attack. After, when they realised this, I gave them a bit of a heads up as to where I thought the knife had come from. They went to that house and only spoke to the male member of that house. They never searched the drawers, which they're supposed to do, to see if it matches any of the drawers. So they only spoke to the male member who didn't do the cooking. They refused to go back to speak to the female member, and the detective that I was talking to at the time was very, very young, but he literally said to me, "What difference does it make? It doesn't change the fact that you were stabbed several times."
No. So in the end, was anybody sentenced, Samantha?
Sorry, to placate me, he said, "But there is more we can do." We're speaking to the knife manufacturers at the moment. Half an hour later, he rang back to say the knife manufacturer had said, "We sell this knife in 5,000 outlets. We can't possibly narrow it down to where it was."
Samantha, I want to hear more. I'm almost completely out of time. Did anybody get a sentence for this attempted murder on you?
Say that again, sorry.
Was anybody sentenced as a result of this?
It's a very complicated case.
Right.
It has been closed.
Okay.
I'm not able to say too much about it.
No, okay. Samantha, I'm going to have to leave you there. I needed longer for that one. But overall, it's a big issue. It's not going away. I believe we need to get tough. I'll be back tomorrow at 6. At 10 tonight, Tom Swarbrick.